I want to get our attention this morning to 1 John chapter 4 as we continue to think about God's love for the world and our part in sharing that love. 1 John chapter 4, I'm going to read beginning with verse 7. Dear friends, let us love one another, for love comes from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. And this is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we also ought to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. And this is how love is made complete among us, so that we will have confidence on the day of judgment. In this world, we are like Jesus. There is no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. And the one who fears is not made perfect in love. Is the gospel relevant for today? Is the gospel relevant for today? And I know asking that question in a church on a Sunday morning, we all know the right answer to that question, the obvious answer to that question, but I want to go a little bit beyond that today, because we are confronted with a war in Israel and Gaza, continuous war in Ukraine, concerns about China, an overall feeling in our culture, in our country, that things don't work as well as they might have worked in our minds. There is a sense that the world is somewhat out of control, and the church seems to be spectators in all that's going on in this world, these greater societal pressures and forces that seem to be overwhelming us. Is the gospel relevant today? And I ask that question because I increasingly come across believers who, while they know the answer to that question, seem to live like the gospel has nothing to say to a world that feels like it's in chaos. We're not the first generation of believers to struggle with the chaos of this world. And John writes to a different generation of believers that also face some degree of chaos in this world. And here's what he said to them: the answer to the chaos of this world, the answer to the relevancy of the gospel is that God is love. That's what we got. It begins with God's love. And in case we forget that basic, essential truth of our faith, 1 John just keeps hammering it over and over and over. God is the source and the definition of love. Love expresses who God is. If you're going to get your theology anywhere close to right, it has to start with God is love. That's how he chooses to relate to all of us. And God's love is a truth more basic and reliable than the ground we walk on or the air we breathe. That's who we worship. God's love doesn't depend on us, doesn't depend on our ability to get to him or our worthiness. We don't try to reach out to God. We don't even have to believe in God in order to be loved by God. We don't have to clean up our act before God can respond to us. We don't have to measure up to some standard in order to be lovable. God just is love, and so he showers love on us, whether we deserve it or not. That's the gospel. That's what we believe. And because that is true, the gospel has relevance in our lives in Culpeper, Virginia, has relevance in the lives of people in Pakistan, it has relevance in lives all over this world. And so if we say we know God's love, then we're going to overflow with God's love to this world. And knowing that we are loved by God means knowing that we are to love our brothers and sisters as God's loved ones too. And in case we haven't understood the seriousness of this command, John puts an amazing sentence in the passage I read. He says, in this world, we are like Jesus. In this world, we are like Jesus. He's not saying we're omnipotent. He's not saying we're omniscient. He's not saying we're morally pure. He is saying that God lives in us. Because of that, we embody God's love for the world. God's love is incarnate in us. And that's what changed those first century believers. They struggled because we all struggle with the religious structure that so often tends to dominate us. And while they had this fresh expression with experience with God and through Jesus Christ, they quickly went to what are the boundaries of this love? What's the boundaries of the community that we are to serve? Who are we supposed to love? And they quickly went to the boundaries of theology. Do they have to believe like we believe? Do they have to do like we do? They went to the boundaries of false teaching. What do we do with those who promote fear instead of God's love? And John's answer to all of that is, in this world, you will be like Jesus. And Jesus ignored all those boundaries that got created. He ignored the limits that religious people imposed. He ate and talked with people when the religious leaders had rejected those folks as heretics, as sinful, as filthy, as despicable. He touched people who were considered untouchable. He welcomed people in that everybody else had kicked out. In this world, we're to be like Jesus. And so if Jesus shows us what God's love is about and what God's love is like, then there's no doubt what our love must be about, what our love must be like as well. We are called to open ourselves to God's love so that God can love others through us. Because when we love one another, we represent God to the world. And I think we would often agree that God's got a bit of a reputation problem in our culture. Not really because of anything of God and Jesus, it's because of our representation of God to this culture. And when we love like Jesus, we represent God to this world. When God's unimaginable, limitless love comes alive in us, we become the presence of God in this world. And the incarnation is this wonderful truth that we love to focus on at Christmas and we love to sing songs about at Christmas. God came to us in the person of Jesus Christ. God became one of us in the person of Jesus Christ. And that helps us get an understanding of God's love for us. But I doubt seriously that most of us came to know and believe in God's love because we encountered that great doctrine of the incarnation. I don't know that I've ever met anybody who said, you know, it was the day that I understood that theology that I came to know God's love. What most of us experienced in understanding God's love is somebody coming alongside us who was a living witness of God's love. That's the story of every believer I have ever known. And because we have received that love, that means we then have the opportunity and the responsibility in every interaction we have to share God's love with others. And here's the problem. And here's why some people think there's an issue with the relevance of the gospel in our day. Because we think the walls of bitterness and hatred are more powerful than the truth of the gospel. And we live like the walls of bitterness and hatred are more powerful than the truth of the gospel. And so because of that, we see people like us moving towards isolation and separation from the world. The world is too overwhelmingly dark, so let's squirrel off on our own. And I'm so glad that churches in Pakistan and churches in Ukraine have not chosen that route. God's people have always faced that challenge when the world seems especially dark. And God's love compels us to go to the world. That's what the early church understood. And we are to say to that world, we have experienced God's love. And we're here to share that love. That's what we do. And we talk a lot about God's love, and we sing about God's love and His mercy and His grace. And it's the center of what we believe about our faith. But the question is whether we actually show that love towards real-life people in our world. Is the gospel of God's love relevant for our world? Probably like you, I've spent some time with extended family over the last week, and I was talking to one of my cousins around dinner one night, and we were just talking about some of the things we're involved with and talking about some of the challenges in the world today. And she made a statement that just really resonated with me. She said, you know, Dan, I just can't watch the news. It's just too overwhelmingly dark and evil for me with everything that's going on in the world. And she said, I can't do that. And I said, you know, that's kind of me too. I just don't do that either. I get overwhelmed by that. And so we talked a little bit about how we choose to serve in our world just to kind of get us off of that darkness. But then I went to church last Sunday with our middle daughter up in Northern Virginia. And it's just great to just sit with my family and go to church, but I also still keep my job hat on a little bit. And I just want to let you know, as I watched that church gather for worship, about a third of them came in after the service started too. So we're about where we should be, by the way, with that. That felt about right to me. But the pastor that day was talking from the Romans passage that we overcome evil with good. And I kind of put that in that conversation with my cousin, and I said, yes, why don't we get off of the evil parts of our world and the focus of our lives being on that? And why don't we do what the New Testament church did, which is overcome evil with good? That's what we have always been called to do. That's the beauty of the gospel. That's the privilege of the gospel. And so for generations, Baptists have come together at Christmas to financially show God's love to the world through our giving to international missions. And if you grew up a Baptist, this is familiar to you. This is what we do. And in the last few years at this church, our giving has been used in transformative ways, helping churches like Pastor Joel's churches in Pakistan, especially dealing with Afghani refugees and going to places where there is no witness of the church in that country, and helping churches in Ukraine through Pastor Vassal and others. In the last 3 years, we've given over $200,000 to international missions from Culpeper, Virginia. It's an amazing number. And we have that opportunity to be generous again, to demonstrate to missionaries and churches and partners around the world that we love them, that we care, that we understand we can overcome evil with good, that we believe the gospel is relevant today, that God is love. And so we ask you to be generous to our international mission partners. Did you know in our country that charitable giving accounts for 2% of the GDP, of the economic output of our country? It's 2% charitable giving, and that's been true for a long, long time, for generations. And that's a pretty high number compared to other economies around the world. And it accounts for a lot of good things that happen in our country and internationally through the charitable giving of people in our country. But could God's people show greater generosity? What if in 10 years, the economists were getting on the news show saying, we're not sure what happened, but charitable giving went from 2% of GDP to 3% of GDP. We don't know how that happened. But if God's people got together and said, man, we want to overcome evil with good, and this is how we do this. One of the ways we express God's love to the world is making sure the resources are available to show God's love to people. And if we could move that number a little bit, all God's people in this country, the economists might not ever be able to figure out why it happened, but we would see the incredible trail of God's love spreading throughout the world. For over 30 years as a pastor, I've asked people to do what my family does, including the family I was born into. And that is to make your largest Christmas gift to the Christmas mission offering. To say this is what it's all about. It's about God's love coming into this earth, changing my life, and I want to make sure God's love continues to change lives. And so the generosity that I've experienced through God, I want to share with the world. And so we've always made our largest Christmas gift to the Christmas mission offering, and I want to invite you to do that this December as well. The gospel is relevant for today's world because the love of God in Jesus Christ has changed us and is still changing the world. In Pakistan and Ukraine, through our other international partners, through Israel and Gaza with churches doing amazing things there. God's love is still changing the world. Let's live and believe that as we keep moving into December. So here's my closing questions today. First one is a relevant question just for all of us. Who do you know that needs to experience God's love? Who do you know that needs to experience God's love? And we try to make this easy for all of us over these next few weeks. We have a pile of events that we do at Christmas. Not to just turn the lights on in the building or be involved in the community, but to give you opportunities to show God's love to others. So this weekend, we've got a bunch of model trains running around in the IG space. It's an incredible show. There are some people that you know that would love to just be invited to that and just walk around. You don't have to read a Bible to them, just engage them that way. The community Christmas dinner that we've been a part of for the last 6 or 7 years is next Monday night. All you have to do is invite somebody and show up. It's an amazing meal over at the CTEC building. I'd encourage you to do that. Class with Clara next week, the Charlottesville Ballet. They're right here in this room. It's amazing. World-class ballet dancers and a bunch of cute 4-year-olds from around Culpeper doing ballet dancing right here. We've got chairs in the back. You can invite somebody. There are tons of things we do that allow you to show God's love, that allow you to be in relationship with people who need to experience God's love. Who do you know that needs to experience God's love this Christmas? And what can you do to be around them and to encourage them? And then the second question is, who do you know that you can invite to join you in being generous this Christmas? Here's what I absolutely believe. None of us want to go through this life being consumers. We want to give back. We want to make a difference in this world. But if you're not connected to a church body, that you might not know how best to do that. Who do you know that you can invite to join you in being generous this Christmas? I should have looked this up a little bit more. I told you that we've sent over $200,000 to international missions over the last 2 years, 3 years. A good portion of that money is money from outside of our church. It's from our community. And I'm not saying they're all unchurched or anything, but they're not connected to us, but they've loved being generous through us to the world. Who do you know? There's lots of ways you can be generous in Culpeper this Christmas season. Lots of organizations. We can help connect you if you need it. There are lots of ways through this church you can be generous. But I want to encourage you to invite somebody to be generous this Christmas season. To say, hey, let's go in together and do this, whatever this is. Whether it's give money or show up and serve or do something like that. Who do you know our greatest opportunity for evangelism, I've always believed, is inviting people to kind of do something that Jesus would do and then see if they don't recognize a need for Jesus in their life. Who do you know you can invite to being generous this Christmas season?